Hey there, I'm Anthony Romano, and in this video I'm going to tell you why 90% of the time you should cut before you bulk, okay? So realistically, only 10% of people are going to have to bulk before they cut, okay? And it's a very unique scenario, and I'm going to explain this. I'm going to make a survey on this eventually that people could just do so they can figure out. But it's very easy because even though people will say, oh yeah, should you bulk or cut first, it's this whole debate. I'm going to give you some reasons as to why 90% of people should be cutting before they bulk. So, and also if you are one of those people. So, why should 90% of people cut before they bulk? Well, when I'm talking 90% of people, most people don't work out already. Most people don't have a lot of muscle mass. Most people have more than average body fat. Okay, so right away, that's pretty good context for a good argument to cut. But most people think, okay, if you're very skinny, they should bulk first. And if you're very skinny, even if you're a bit skinny fat, you can bulk before you can cut. I was very, very skinny, relatively lean, so I bulked before I started cutting when I was a kid. And, you know, it was pretty effective. But in hindsight, I actually should have cut first, and some of the first cuts I did actually primed my body to build more muscle. So that's one of the other reasons why you might want to cut first. But let me explain. If you're somebody who's, unless you are very, 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 very skinny and you're already ripped, then, you know, if you're that person, then bulk, okay? Then bulk already. If it doesn't mean necessarily ripped, even if you can just see a vague outline of your six-pack or whatever, okay? If you don't have any love handles or whatever, okay? In that case, then bulk. And I've coached people who are in that scenario as well. Now, realistically, it is best for most people to cut first, especially with a keto approach. So you know my videos, if you've seen them, I love keto. I've been doing it for 8 years, and I attribute many of my muscle gains to the sort of priming of insulin sensitivity, amongst other things and benefits, cholesterol benefits that keto provides. But, you know, if you do it right. But why should most people cut first? Okay, so number one, the more body fat you have, the less insulin sensitive you are, okay? So there's a linear correlation to this. If your waist is past a certain measurement, I believe it's 35 for men, and I believe 37 or 38 for women. If your waist is bigger than that, you're insulin resistant, or at least you're closer to it. You're less insulin sensitive, okay? There's a direct correlation with this, the amount of body fat in a certain part of your body that can tell us how insulin sensitive you are. So why do you want to be insulin sensitive? Insulin sensitive means with insulin, your body's primary anabolic hormone, okay, to everything. If you are more sensitive, that means your body just has to release a small amount of insulin to do insulin's job. So that means muscle building. If you're insulin sensitive, it only takes a small amount of insulin to build muscle. And if you're insulin resistant or less insulin sensitive, that means your body has to release a load of insulin, right, which is the extra is gonna cause fat gain, in order to actually distribute nutrients to your muscles, to your organs, etc. So to actually get things to the tissues in your body has to make more insulin, and too much insulin is going to make you store fat. It's just, this is a fact. There's plenty of evidence on this. So whether that insulin is achieved by too many calories, whether it's achieved by too much sugar, it doesn't matter, okay? Whether you like carb dieting or keto dieting, whatever. The point is, too much insulin is going to reduce your insulin sensitivity, and that's going to make you have a higher propensity to building fat, okay? And it's going to simultaneously reduce your propensity to build muscle, okay? So it's a double whammy. Now, of course, the leaner you are, the more insulin sensitive you may be. Of course, the more you train, the more you lift weights, the more you do sports, the more insulin sensitive you're going to be, because you're putting an adaptive stressor on your body where it has to adapt in order to continue using insulin at a high rate. Now, the other reason is the more fat tissue you have, not only is there a direct correlation between your testosterone and your insulin sensitivity, but there's also a direct correlation between your amount of body fat you have and the amount of aromatase. Okay, so I've talked about this in other videos, but the more body fat you have, there's a couple things here. First of all, you're gonna have more aromatase. What is aromatase? It's an enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. Estrogen is anabolic to fat tissue. Testosterone is anabolic to muscle tissue and catabolic to fat tissue. So basically, the more testosterone you have, whether you're a man or a woman, the more you're gonna have the ability to get like shredded and look like a god, because it's an exaggeration, but that's true. Like The more testosterone you have, the better ability you have to build muscle, the better insulin sensitivity you have. There's direct correlations in studies between testosterone and insulin sensitivity. And you also have a lower propensity to build fat. So when we're talking about, interpreting this new philosophy of building muscle and staying lean, you can lean bulk. It's easier to lean bulk when you're already lean. That's why kids when you're growing up who are just, they're already the athletic kid and they grow up and they build muscle, the mesomorph body type, because to those who have everything, more is given. Okay, it's just a universal law of nature. The more in shape you are, the more you can get away with. Okay, in terms of splurging on junk food, etc. The more overweight you are, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are overweight, or people who are overweight. If they have a junk meal, they'll notice it right away. If you were naturally a chubby kid, you probably tend to notice that as you cheat on your diet or whatever, you have a quicker response to that, okay, in a undesirable way. You notice the fat more, you notice the water retention more, the bloating. And that's because it's a universal law of nature, okay? The more you are down a path, the more you're gonna have momentum going down that path. So example, think of somebody who's rich, right? Like a musician or something, right? Think of Drake as an example I've been thinking of lately. Drake can go places, he's already rich, he's already got, millions of dollars, but people will give him free shit because he's already that far. It's crazy. The more you have, now people are starting to give you stuff for free, right? But meanwhile, if you're poor, or if you're broke or whatever, essentially it's harder for you to not only make money, it's harder for you to get a job because you're already in a shitty financial situation. So it's simply just a law of nature. It's called the Matthew principle. And this applies to bodybuilding as well and other, physiological endeavors for the most part, because the more sensitivity you have to insulin, the better your ability to build muscle and not store fat. Meanwhile, the more insulin resistant you are, the greater ability you have to build fat, if you can call it an ability, and the weaker ability you have to build muscle, okay? So you have to, take a very aggressive approach and start weight training, doing all these other activities to boost your testosterone, which will then, to try to pull yourself out of that side of the pool. But it's simply a momentum law is all it really is. It's a law that the further you are down a path, the harder it is to turn around and the easier it is to keep going down that path. Okay, it's a law of momentum. And when we're applying this to the physical context of why you should cut before bulking most of the time, most people don't have an optimized, background scenario that's facilitating a building muscle. And that's why if you cut, especially if you do a keto cut, you have a better ability to store fat-soluble vitamins, you have a better ability to burn up fat that might be storing aromatase, burn up fat that is, reducing your leptin sensitivity. So leptin is kind of like the master macro regulator of your hormonal kingdom, basically. And if you think of insulin as a in-the-moment micro-regulator of, hunger and appetite, leptin is like the grand scheme, the background, the macro regulator, because the more body fat you have, the less sensitive you are to leptin signal. So basically, it's harder to lose body fat the more fat you have. So if you're somebody who's already overweight or you're already not lean, right, then you have basically a harder time to lose fat. So it's not even just the insulin side of things, it's the leptin side of things, which is the, the micro regulator of hunger hormones and the macro regulator of hunger hormones in the background, leptin, because leptin is in fat cells basically, and it has to hear the signal. So essentially without leptin being able to be optimized, it's going to be harder for you to burn body fat. That's why the more overweight you are as well, it's another reason why it's harder to burn body fat. And that's another reason why one great way, the only way that can really, in the grand scheme of things, influence your leptin sensitivity is keto dieting is the most aggressive approach, because it is the biggest diet approach that affects your insulin sensitivity. If you affect your insulin sensitivity with a very qualitatively dominant approach affecting the hormones, then you can macro affect leptin. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. What I basically mean by that is, if we're taking a calorie approach, yeah, if you're eating 3,000 calories and then you go to 2,000, you're gonna lower your insulin. But the amount you lower your insulin when you go from 3,000 calories a day of a carb-inclusive diet to 2,500 with a keto diet, your insulin's way lower. And you're basically able to create a more powerful hormonal response. And that hormonal response is then going to influence leptin. Okay, so basically, when I compare the two, the reason why keto is the best approach to diet at first as well is because of how it affects your hormones. So oftentimes I just use a blanket term and say keto affects your hormones better. But when we're talking about the ability to build muscle, even though you could still lower your insulin on a carb diet with calories, it's way more powerful and way more sustainable if you do it with the keto approach. And people who've done this know it because they feel it, okay? So that's why it's a lot easier for people to explain these things. and I'm just trying to be the guy who explains them. So either way, keto cut is an amazing way to start, and it then will optimize your sensitivity to insulin, because a keto cut, which means cutting without sugar. Okay, it doesn't mean dumping butter on everything. It means simply not eating sugar, okay, for a period of time. It's going to reset your metabolic mechanisms, basically. It's going to increase insulin sensitivity, which we already know is beneficial for muscle building and already know is beneficial for avoiding fat storage. And then it's also going to affect your long-term leptin sensitivity, which is going to affect the ability you have to burn fat, okay? And in the future, avoid storing fat. It's like they're the two inverses of one another. They're the yin and the yang, okay? As this other great, keto-related book I have here explains from, with a lot of studies and whatnot. But this is all data I've synthesized out of my, 8 years of keto dieting and all the research I've been through. People don't really explain hormones in this sort of cohesive narrative, okay? They all have an influence, and there's a way to look at them. There's a philosophical way to look at them, which is another reason why kudos to Volek and Finney for their yin-yang here, because that's realistically one of the best ways to explain things that I just happen to have in common with them. So, overall, should you cut before you bulk? Yes, 90% of the time. If you're somebody who's already very lean, yes, you obviously, even if you still think, fuck, I just want to bulk, then, you can bulk. But know that your body would be more optimized for it if you had cut first. And most people are not in that optimized state. If you're somebody who's already relatively lean, you are generally more optimized. If you're somebody who's already active, you're more optimized. There's different variables that I will have to make into a survey, to cover the whole complete picture for people soon. But keep in mind, if it's the worst piece of advice I was ever given in the bodybuilding context was dirty bulk, and when you're young, that's the worst piece of advice I was given. It was so just detrimental to my career of bodybuilding, because essentially I was given that advice by bro science guys who basically just said, yeah, you're young, you can always cut later. Listen, there's not a direct correlation between the amount of muscle you build and the amount of body fat you build. They're not parallel, okay? If basically, I hope this is facing the left side of the video, maybe I'll go this way. No, this way. So if this is your amount of muscle gain, this is your amount of body fat, they don't move up in tandem. They don't. They're completely independent from one another. Of course, they can have overlap, right? Where, maybe they go up at the same time sometimes, but then the point is, your muscle gain can go up independent of fat gain. They don't have to be synonymous. And if you simply get the appropriate amount of protein in your diet, and you get, regardless of carbs, and you get adequate training stimulus, and you get adequate amount of energy, but if you're getting your energy from fats, you're basically better equipped to have more energy with less calories. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to get those three variables: protein, energy, and training. Those are going to actually be the main driver of growth, okay? Not simply excess calories, not simply jacking up the amount of carbs, because past a certain point, you're just going to reduce your insulin sensitivity, which is another reason why, the carb diet approach is not really the best way to diet for fat loss. So this video was kind of meant to be more podcast style, okay? Just random dialogue stream of consciousness, but that's the main gist of this video, is that most people should cut before they bulk, because most people are not in a scenario where they need to bulk first. Younger people are close to that area, but again, surveys are needed, which I'll be making soon. But overall, hopefully this video has given you some extra precautions as to why you shouldn't just jump into a dirty bulk. Because, side note, here's the whole saving grace of this video as well, is that if you are somebody who is, doesn't have that much muscle, but you still cut and train, you're probably going to gain muscle at the same time, by the way, because you're so young, your body is so new to training, that this is an extra, just bomb to drop on the fact that even for somebody who's already skinny and you are cutting in some way, as long as you're getting adequate amount of protein and energy in general, not starving yourself, you will grow, okay, from training at the same time. So it's almost like you can get the best of both worlds at that point. And if you're young and you're trying to bulk and you're already not, the leanest guy around, you can simply do a cut and train at the same time, and you're probably gonna get the best of both worlds. So that's, the wrapping up of this video. Leave me some more questions. I know it was a random one, and sporadic, but try to get out as much knowledge as I have here, because I've worked with so many people to great results. And realistically, the biggest regret of my lifting career and of all my friends' lifting careers is dirty bulking at a young age. Do not do it, okay? That's not the topic of this video, but most people benefit from cutting first and training at the same time than simply jumping into a bulk. It's hard to dig yourself out of that hole once you're already in it. Remember the Matthew principle. All right, Anthony Romano, peace.